Picture a massive oil tanker sitting in the harbor, not loaded, empty, riding high out of the water, hull exposed, tanks hollow. Your instinct says, that's the safe one. The dangerous ship is the one packed with millions of gallons of crude, right? That's the one you keep away from a spark. That instinct is exactly backwards. The empty tanker is the one that can explode. The full tanker, carrying enough crude to fuel a city, is actually the safer vessel. And this isn't a footnote. This is why entire international maritime safety protocols exist. Because something invisible is happening inside those hollow tanks right now, and engineers have been fighting hard to control it for over 100 years. Here's what's actually happening. Liquid crude oil doesn't explode. That's the first thing most people get wrong. It burns, slowly, heavily, like a thick fire, but it doesn't detonate. The real explosive agent in this story isn't the oil, it's the vapor above it. Every hydrocarbon liquid evaporates to some degree. Crude oil constantly releases light volatile compounds, propane, butane, gasoline-range vapors, and those gases mix with the air above the liquid surface. In a full tank, that airspace is almost zero. The vapor concentration is so high that there isn't enough oxygen to sustain combustion. The mixture is above the explosive range. It would smother itself before it could ignite. But drain the oil out and everything changes. Now the tank is a sealed steel room filling with vapor and air in exactly the proportions needed for detonation. Not too rich, not too lean, right in the middle of the explosive range. Engineers call this the flammable zone, and an empty tanker tank sits squarely inside it. Think of a nearly empty gas can left in a hot car. The mostly empty one is the one you don't want. The mostly full one is the safer bet. The problem scales up from a garage to a ship the length of 4 city blocks. Here's the part that makes it worse. The most dangerous moment isn't out at sea. It's in port, during unloading. As oil gets pumped out of a tank, vapor floods in to fill the space behind it in real time. The tank doesn't flip from safe to dangerous all at once. It passes through a moving window of maximum explosive risk as the oil level drops. Full at the top, safe, partially emptied, inside the danger zone, fully emptied and purged, safer again. But that middle phase is where everything can go wrong, and it's happening right next to a dock, next to pumping equipment, next to workers performing the kind of routine industrial activity that generates static electricity, heat, and sparks without anyone thinking twice. Static from the pumping lines alone can be enough to trigger ignition. So can a radio. So can someone dropping a metal tool into a tank they assumed was safe because it no longer held oil. Scale is the other thing that completely changes your mental model. These tanks aren't containers in the way most people picture them. They're rooms. To get a sense of the size, a single cargo tank on a large tanker can run 80 feet long, 60 feet wide, and 30 feet tall. That's not a container. That's a warehouse with welded steel walls. When a vapor cloud fills a space that size and finds an ignition source, it doesn't flash or simply burn. The pressure wave has nowhere to go. It detonates. The overpressure can blow the tank top completely off or rupture the hull outward. The larger the enclosed space, the faster vapor accumulates and the more violent the release. A crew member walking into an empty tank for a routine inspection without the right precautions is walking into a sealed explosive chamber. Confined space entry on tankers is one of the leading causes of maritime fatality, and a dramatic fire doesn't even need to happen. The vapor itself, at high enough concentrations, is toxic long before anyone sees a flame. The engineering solution to this problem is one of the more counterintuitive things in maritime design. It works by replacing the danger with nothing. After a tanker unloads its cargo, instead of allowing the empty tanks to fill with air, the ship deliberately floods them with inert gas, typically the exhaust from the ship's own boilers, scrubbed and cooled before it enters the tank, or in some cases, dedicated nitrogen. That gas displaces the air. It brings the oxygen concentration in the tank below the threshold required for combustion. The vapor is still there, but without adequate oxygen, the mixture cannot detonate. You've removed one leg of the fire triangle permanently and continuously for the entire time the tanks are vulnerable. The system monitors oxygen levels around the clock. If a reading climbs, if a seal leaks, if a vent opens, if air gets in from anywhere, alarms trigger. That tank is treated as active again until the inert atmosphere is restored. Here's the behavioral paradox. When a tanker sits docked, empty, being prepared for the next cargo run, trained crews deliberately keep the tank sealed and pressurized with inert gas. No fresh air, no ventilation. The tanks stay sealed tight, gas pressure holding steady, right there in the middle of a busy commercial port. To anyone who hasn't worked on a tanker, this seems backwards. You'd assume the oil is gone, open it up, let it breathe. But opening it up is exactly what creates the risk. The moment outside air enters a tank still coated in residual cargo film, you're assembling the explosive mixture from scratch. The protocol is never open a tank without first confirming inert gas coverage. And if personnel need to enter, for inspection, for cleaning, the procedures are among the most rigorous in any industrial setting. Pre-entry atmosphere testing, continuous monitoring during the work, standby rescue personnel staged outside, no exceptions. Even so, violations happen. People are behind schedule. Alarms get silenced. People die. The industry understood vapor risk for decades, but understanding something and treating it seriously are two different things. For a long time, inert gas systems existed on some vessels as optional upgrades. Vapor management was a best practice for careful operators, not a universal requirement. Then came 1969. Within a few months of each other, 3 VLCCs exploded during tank washing operations. The Marpessa, the Mactra, the Kong Haakon 7. All three were cleaning their empty tanks, a routine process required before switching cargo or preparing for inspection. Tank washing churns residual oil into fine mist, generates static, disturbs settled vapor, and pushes the atmosphere inside the tank directly through the explosive range. In each case, an ignition source that investigators could never definitively identify turned an empty ship into a catastrophe. The International Maritime Organization could no longer treat this as a manageable operational risk. Mandatory inert gas systems became international law for large tankers, not recommended. Required. The rule change didn't come from careful deliberation, it came from 3 ships that no longer existed. Before 1969, IGS was something some ships had. After, it was the minimum standard for operating. If you've ever stood near a large tanker in port and looked down the length of the deck, you've probably noticed a series of pipes running along the top, connecting each cargo tank hatch back toward the engine room. That's the inert gas distribution network. Those pipes are a significant reason the ship hasn't exploded. The faint hiss near a tanker's hull at dock isn't a malfunction. It's controlled venting, pressure management in the inert gas blanket sitting over the cargo tanks. And the warning placards on those tank entry hatches aren't bureaucratic formality. They're marking the exact boundary between a breathable atmosphere and a lethal one. The tanker riding high in the harbor, the one that looks light, exposed, conspicuously out of the water, that's the active hazard, not the loaded ship. The one that looks safe is the one being managed most carefully. None of this is neat in practice. Oxygen sensors drift over time, seals degrade, operators under schedule pressure override alarms. Older and smaller tankers may not carry full IGS capability, relying instead on procedural controls and atmospheric testing by hand. Crude oil varies. Lighter grades evaporate more aggressively than heavy crude at ambient temperature, which means the explosive risk profile shifts depending on what cargo the ship last carried. And tank washing, regardless of how well you purge beforehand, reactivates the problem. That's what killed the 3 ships in 1969. That's still what the system is designed around today. The gap between a rule existing and the rule being followed perfectly is exactly where accidents still live. The empty tanker isn't empty, it's full of something invisible, chemically poised, impossible to remove by simply cracking a hatch. The engineering solution isn't a thicker hull or a stronger valve. It's an atmosphere, a blanket of inert gas that makes detonation chemically impossible. You're not building something stronger to contain the risk. You're removing the one ingredient the risk cannot survive without. Every large tanker you see riding high in the water is a contained explosive being actively managed. The safety isn't in the steel, it's in the gas nobody can see. And if a ship carrying invisible hydrocarbon vapor already sounds difficult to engineer around, consider what happens when the cargo isn't oil at all, when it's liquefied natural gas. LNG carriers operate under a completely different set of physics, and the failure mode isn't an explosion. It's something colder, stranger, and in some ways far harder to engineer against. The system built to prevent that disaster makes inert gas look straightforward,